Hi, I'm Dan, and today I'm reviewing In the Dark, Season 1, Episode 2, Mommy Issues. I think this was a really good step up from the pilot. I'm excited to talk about this show, and I really hope that it finds an audience because I thought episode two was really good, and I honestly feel like In the Dark in its first two episodes is some of the strongest start that we've seen for a CW show. I feel like right out the gate they get the tone, they get what they're going for. The characters, their acting is on point. They're likable. They feel fully fleshed out and human. I'm excited about the ongoing stories, but I'm also excited about the little things happening episode to episode. There's very few things that I don't like about this show. I talked a lot in my episode one review about some of the representational issues that the show has, and I still think some of those are there. But overall, I mean, I just think Murphy is a great, interesting character. I think that the actress is doing a fantastic job with it, and I want to see more of this world and more of these stories. And even if they aren't perfect, I think it's a really great step up for blind people to have a character like this. The main plotline of this episode focused on Murphy trying to find Tyson's mother so that she could file a missing persons report because, time had gone by. They weren't really making a lot of forward momentum on finding Tyson's killer or finding Tyson's body. And so having a missing persons report would be an important step. And Murphy couldn't do it herself. They needed a blood relative. So she's very active. She has a lot of agency as she goes to the cops, then she goes to Darnell, and Darnell doesn't want to help her. And then she ends up, through Darnell, meeting this Max guy who is our new love interest character that comes up in this episode, who owns a food truck. And he ends up sort of like blackmailing her-ish into a date so that he can find Darnell's mother. As a side note here, I thought Max was a really interesting addition to the show. I mean, I knew, given CW, that a love interest thing was coming for this show. I think that they did a very good job in this episode setting him up. He's likable, he's charismatic. He and Murphy have good chemistry, and their combative nature and their sort of sarcasm and sniping at each other, I think works well. He's kind of a bad boy, but that makes sense for her. And I'm excited to see where they take that. Ultimately, what all this leads to is her finding Tyson's mom, and that leads to a really fantastic scene of Murphy crying and, being in Tyson's room, listening to his old iPod, her sort of commiserating with the mom, who she didn't want to tell necessarily what happened with Tyson too after talking with Max about it. But then they sort of have to go through that together and deal with the reality of what might have happened to Tyson. I think the mom character did a really good job. That was a really raw, emotional scene. And again, CW shows don't hit me in the feels that intensely very often. And I thought that, especially for episode 2, I cared. And the flashbacks they gave of Tyson throughout this episode really helped that a lot. I talked about in my pilot review that I thought seeing the mugging would help ground us in her story a little bit more. I still think the mugging could have been done a little bit better, but I do think it was an important step to seeing her first interactions with Tyson. And Tyson is a very likable character that makes us, drive forward and care about finding out who killed him and what happened to him. And seeing the mother and, her just kindness makes you, want that even more. So I think that there was a good next step in the path of sort of the mythology of figuring out what's going on here. They're doing the sort of Veronica Mars thing of like the season-long killer, while also, she's working towards that consistently, but also she has other things like the dating, like the stuff with her own parents going on that I thought worked really well. And let's talk about the dating, because if we're going to talk representationally like I did in my previous review, I will say her getting the UTI and having such a bad sexual experience does further the sort of the issues I had in the pilot as far as her like being punished for sex, that it's not really a sex positive show. It's more like, oh yes, she has a lot of sex and that's a bad thing. She's a mess and she's getting this UTI and she, isn't taking care of herself well. Not the best thing necessarily, but the show is very frank about this stuff, and to a certain degree I appreciate that. I'm also interested in whether the show ever really delves into the fact that, especially her as a blind girl, bringing home these random people all the time, not necessarily the safest choice to be making. So, it gets into this interesting thing where I'm like, I feel like that's something worth talking about, but also at the same time, I do want it to be sex positive, so you end up in this weird zone. And speaking of the frankness with which this show deals with sex and just reality, I guess, in general. We have the storyline that I thought was really cool this week with Jess, who is Murphy's roommate, and Jess's girlfriend, Vanessa. I really like this pairing, from the get-go. I think they did a really good job setting up this episode and this romance here. I like that Vanessa is sort of combative with Murphy, that she doesn't take her shit, and I'm interested to see how that relationship evolves, especially because she's being sort of protective of Jess. And Murphy is not the best friend ever to Jess most of the time. And I think that the whole storyline here of Jess being insecure about Vanessa's sexual past and all that stuff, and that they actually went to a sex shop and got to all that, the fact that they went there with it and the strap on and everything, thought that was really interesting and not something you see nearly enough. I thought that was a frank look at this idea. And even though I don't think that necessarily they talked it through as much as I thought might have been interesting, the whole scene of, them telling each other that they love each other, thought was adorable. I really like both of those actresses. It feels like I believe in their relationship so quickly and so easily, and that really has to do with their chemistry and the writing. So definitely a fan there. I'd be interested to see, though, if any lesbian or queer viewers, what they thought of that relationship, what they thought of that dynamic in that storyline, whether they had any issues with it, because for me, I thought it was great, but I don't know, what some other people's opinions might be about that fear of the penis, missing the penis, as they call it. And in general, I thought the show had a lot of good humor in this episode, both with like Murphy yelling about Darnell being a drug dealer and all the jokes about the penis stuff. And then I also really like the whole thing with the cop and his daughter accidentally trying to set him up with a hooker. That was all really funny, and I love the daughter character and I love the cop. They're all just really good. Especially I love that the daughter is actually blind, and it just adds an extra layer of realism and representation that I think is really great. In general, what I think works so well about this show and about this episode is Murphy being so snarky and combative with everybody she interacts with, but it's still making her a likable person because she is going after a goal that we believe in, and that shows her heart here. And yes, she's a smart ass with the dress thing at the end of the episode, and yes, she's not the best daughter in the world, but she is focused on the greater good. And yes, you want her to be better to people around her, but you know that she has that capacity and you want to see that growth and that redemption arc for her. Anyway, I'm just excited to see where the show goes. I really do hope that it finds an audience. I know it's a mid-season CW show. It doesn't have the best ratings ever. I don't feel like they're pushing it that hard. It's a very easy show for them to just pop out their first season and then just let it go by the wayside, but I hope it doesn't, because I think it is very well written. I think it is smart and funny and does something really interesting representationally. So I hope people are out there watching, and I hope that you guys enjoy and comment on this video and let me know what you like about the show and what you think it could do better in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you're doing okay.